I swear to God, one of the reasons I hate doing this is because I have to see myself on camera, and every time I do, it's a reminder I need to shave about every 5 hours. Mac Engel, Fort Worth Star Telegram, Engel Podcast. Thanks for being here, as always. There are some interviews that I've done that have required a lot of legwork, a lot of persistence, a lot of asks, a lot of waiting, a lot of patience, and sometimes they just fall into my lap. Now, I've been very fortunate over the years to interview a wide array of personalities, famous, less famous, people that just kind of interested me. And that's one of the reasons I do this. I just find people who really interest me. You know, when I've been asked sometimes, who are your favorite interviews? Certainly Dr. Robert Ballard. He was the man who discovered the Titanic back in the 80s. Screenwriter Aaron Sorkin was a really interesting guy. I got to interview President Bush W a couple times in sort of a crowded setting, not a one-on-one or intimate setting. He was pretty interesting. There have been a bunch of other people. Certainly one of my favorites was Dr. Jeffrey Wigand. He was the whistleblower who exposed big tobacco back in the 90s. They made a movie about that whole thing called The Insider. I did a podcast with him a couple years ago. Fascinating man. There's a bunch of others. But this is one for this episode. This is one that I've tried to get for a long time, and I couldn't. For whatever reason, I couldn't. And it fell kind of in my lap. I'd seen on social media that Jeanette Lee, the very famous pool player from the 90s and the early part of the century and even to today, had written a memoir with Indianapolis Star writer Dana Hunsinger Benbow. And I thought, oh, here's my opportunity. Maybe I can get her. Maybe I can finally talk to the famous Black Widow. And it took a little while, not that long, but I was finally able to set it up. And I was so happy I did it because her story in this interview far exceeded all of my expectations. And my expectations for this interview were pretty high, like silver medalist, and this ended up being gold. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Black Widow, Jeanette Lee. So, Miss Lee, I really want to thank you for doing this, and I'm going to make you feel awkward for a second. I have wanted to interview you for about 20 years. And I couldn't.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. I have wanted, you have fascinated me for a long time because you stood out in a way that very few people do in any sport, and you have. And the more I familiarize myself with your story, I was really kind of blown away with it. But I want to start from the top with how you're doing. I know you live in Florida. I've been made aware. Is everything okay with your home and those things? I know you're in New York now. Is everything okay back home?
Thank God. I just found out that my house, there's no damage at all.
Wow.
We've been killing ourselves the last few days, and it definitely had its effect on my body because I was just very worn out from it. But we were sandbagging and taping up all the doors and doing all that. So there's no damage to the house, but there is no power. So we are going to lose everything in our fridge and freezers, which is the least of my worries.
Right.
So, and the one person, I brought my small Chihuahua and small cat with us to New York, but we have a giant 100-pound dog that couldn't come. So my friend was taking care of her, but her house has been completely damaged and lost power and lost everything, glasses, windows broken, everything, the whole bit. So she's like, I can't take care of it because she already has 3 dogs. But she was the only person I knew other than my ex-husband that was not evacuating. And I didn't have any place to put everywhere was full. And I
Right.
couldn't get him on a plane with me.
Right.
So she just said, I'm dropping him off. You're going to have to figure it out. And all my friends are still evacuated. So they're slowly going to make their way back. But I was able to get a couple of my players that play there in Tampa to check on the house, and it does look like it's in good condition. So I'll
I'm
figure
glad to
that
hear
out.
that. Then
Thank you
the
for
other
asking.
question is you've been very open about your health since you were diagnosed with ovarian cancer in
Yes.
2021. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I have my ups and downs. I still have chronic fatigue. I'm trying to build my stamina, just physical therapy, and I'm so motivated and so determined to get stronger than I ever was. But it's not as easy as I would like, my effort to be enough, but it's not enough. My body is definitely, I have a couple autoimmune diseases that I can't get treated for because of my history with cancer. And the pressure of these hurricanes have apparently set it off. So you have what's called a flare up, and it's caused a lot of pain. So I'm moving slowly. But I'm still very thankful. I'm very encouraged. And that's about it. I'm going to get there one way or another. It's just going to be a matter of being patient.
Well, I'm so glad you're doing so well and that you've written
Thank
this
you.
book and that you're sharing your story because I think it's pretty inspiring.
Thank you.
And there's one detail in this that when I came across it, I was really kind of surprised. I want to make sure I've read this right. You grew up in New York City, and the high school that you went to was Bronx Science. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm in New York City now. That's where we chose to evacuate to.
So you go to the epicenter of the universe where you grow up. And for those people who don't know, Bronx Science is one of the top 3 public high schools in New York City. And the only reason I know this is my dad went to Brooklyn Tech 1,000
Right.
years ago, and you had to test into that one. So
Yes.
you test in to Bronx Science, which means
Yes.
you're no dummy, right?
Right.
You're a good student,
Yeah,
and then
thank
you
you.
drop out.
Yes.
How did your parents take a student who was good enough to test into one of the most acclaimed public high schools in the United States, and she says, "Yeah, I don't want to do this anymore."
I'll tell you, my mom had already been dealing with the rebellious, teen starting around 12 or 13. And I think what she told me was when I was around 15 or 16, she had quit working just to pay attention to me. I think she saw that she was losing me. And then she said she realized it was too late. By then, she really had I was not listening to her at all. I had already learned that I can go hang out at friends' houses and do my own thing. I was an all-powerful, 15-year-old.
Right.
And so, she just didn't have much say. But I'll tell you, I did not have a great experience in school. I was good at school. School wasn't really that difficult for me to figure out, but just the whole environment, I don't think I ever felt like I fit in anywhere. And every friend group that I would think that I was really part of, I would find out really I wasn't. And there was just a lot of heartache and heartbreak, and I just was ready to move on to college. So I told my mom, I'm dropping out, I'm going to take my GED, and I'm just going to start college at a local college, and that's what I did. I just I had no intention of not having a degree at all, but I did just stop. I was by then cutting so much school, I would have probably failed anyway. I was hanging out with my new boyfriend, my first and really last high school sweetheart. And he was a year above me, and I was just cutting out a lot. So I got my GED, and I started at Queens College, but then by then, my ex-boyfriend, my high school sweetheart, had gone off to school at UB. And we missed each other so often. It wasn't that easy to go from Buffalo to New York, back and forth. So I decided I wanted to go to UB, and I was good enough that I was able to transfer from Queens Community up to UB. But then he and I broke up, and I was like, I'm done with this. And I came back, and I had just started getting crazy for pool before I had gone up there. And when I went up to UB, I played in the student union and things like that, but I will always regret that I made that move, because there was a guy named Ginky, George Sansucci, who was right at my level before I left to go to UB. And after 1 year of me being up there and I came back, he was already the best in the city. And I was just still, I had gotten better, improved very quickly, but I wasn't at his level. I was certainly the best female, but I always thought, what if I stayed? Because I was improving so fast at Chelsea Billiards in Manhattan. Because that was the mecca. That was where all the top pros and all the top hustlers, top players were coming through and battling out. I got to watch really world caliber pool. And occasionally, if I had enough money, I could match up against them, which gave me a lot of experience that you're not going to get at a local student union college. And so, I don't know, it broke my heart, I will say that.
Which part of it broke your heart?
Just feeling like, had I stayed at Chelsea and not gone up to UB, I would have been far better. I mean, where Ginky went in 1 year, he was just right at my level or maybe a little bit below, because he refused to learn defense at that point. But when I came back a year later, he was beating everyone. Everyone. And I felt like there was no reason why I couldn't have done that, because we both started playing pool at the same time. We literally had met at Chelsea, became friends, and we were both ball bangers, wanting to be the best. And being in that environment definitely drove you to want to be the best, because you just saw such great players, and you really weren't asking how much money they were making. You just thought, wow, what an incredible life. How awesome would it be to just play pool for a living?
So pool halls have their own reputation, right? They're a little bit
Yes.
on the edge, a little seedier, kind of dirty, mostly guys that you wouldn't, want to hang out with in terms of the country club type or whatever else.
Yeah.
And, you're a young woman in that scene. Were you comfortable? You talk about wanting to be comfortable. Were you comfortable there?
I'll tell you, when I started playing pool, this place was a 20,000 square foot billiard club that was 2 levels. It was the only billiard club that had over 35 pool tables, 4 snooker tables, 3 cushion billiard tables, and the best players in the world. It was very clean. There were people that were hired to literally go around and clean and stamp their really fancy hotel ashtrays. They had a beautiful cappuccino machine at the front desk. And it was nothing like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It was maybe 2 or 3 years after The Color of Money had come out, a few years after The Color of Money had come out. And all these really nice places were opening up, and all the dives were really going away. So I didn't get to experience that. But it took about 2 years for all the hustlers that had started coming into Chelsea Billiards to hustle all of these yuppies that were coming in from Wall Street and Chelsea.
Yeah.
And within a couple years, that place that was packed with businessmen and teens and just people of all, places, it had become that same kind of dive, because all these people got tired of getting hustled and stopped going there, and all that was left were hustlers. So I did get to see that world a few years later, but by then I was family, and I was one of the ones hustling all the people that were coming in, and it was paying for my way to play in all of the regional women's championship, state championship, and it took me 3 years to turn pro, a year and a half to become #1 in the world. So I didn't stay in that environment for too long, but I do talk about this in my memoir, The Black Widow, through Triumph Books. And I'm so proud of it. It just came out, and it's in big bookstores, nationwide, probably worldwide. And I hope you guys can get to see that book, because I'm very proud of it.
You should be. It's you wrote it with somebody I have a great deal of respect for, and Dana. Dana's one of the reasons I subscribed to the Indianapolis Star. Yeah, I know. I was so happy that you did it with her, because I have followed her for a while. I grew up in Indianapolis. She's the reason I subscribed to that paper. When I'd seen that she put on social media that she wrote a book with you, I was really jealous, because I really was, because I've written a few books, but the one book I wrote with somebody, it wasn't a great experience, and I was like, oh my God, how did she get this? And I didn't ask her that, so I ask you this: how did you how did you know her well enough to say we should write a book together?
Well, we were looking for someone to write the book, and at this time I was deep in my chemo, in my battle with cancer. At the time that we had gotten this offer from Triumph Books, and I believe that I had gotten it through Octagon, my management company. In any case, they said, "Do you have anyone that could write this book with you?" Because I was not in a mental place to be able to, write a book on my own. I didn't feel. And they gave me a selection of people, and just reading what Dana had accomplished, and her being from Indianapolis, where I had lived for the last 20 years, and her being a woman was important to me, to just be able to understand me a little bit better. And then we interviewed her, and it was immediate. She's the one. I mean, you just got to fall in love with her immediately. And she was smart. She was caring. She was, I could feel her sincerity and her passion to make this a book I would be very proud of. I felt like she was going to do whatever it took. I mean, not that I'd want to push her to that, but I really felt her sincerity. So it was pretty easy for me, out of the selection that we had, that she would be the one.
So go back to earlier in your career, mid 90s, late 90s, I think, when I'd seen you on ESPN, Jeanette, and I remember I was blown away by it because I'd never seen anybody like you on television playing pool.
Right.
The outfit, all of it. I'd never seen that before. And I remember I'll never forget it the first time. I was like, who is that? And I'm wondering when you were aware of how much that reaction, whether male or female, who just stopped and said, who the hell is that? And what that could potentially be worth to you in your career in terms of household recognition.
I will say that when I was first starting, I was getting a lot of attention because I really came out of nowhere. Most of the women, they had seen them growing up, starting a lot younger, and it was a very much a clique, a family. And then boom, this Asian woman comes in out of nowhere, and all the media is paying attention to her. I definitely felt the hate and the jealousy from the other women. It was very strong. It was very strong, very obvious that I was not part of their family, and they were not going to allow me to become part of their family. I remember my first, pretty sure I have this in my book, but my first tournament win. We had started the women's tour in 1993 called the WPBA Classic Tour. By the end of that year, I had been coming up. I'd end up ranked 11th in the world in my first year, and I went to the World Championship, and I came in second. And even that was something that was heartbreaking, because during the finals and all of my matches, the other women, American women, not the men, but the American women, actually booed against me when I was playing against the other countries. And it felt awful.
You can imagine.
And there was, it was just so obvious. I mean, I hear stories about it from the other Europeans and some of the Asians that they noticed that. But I spent a lot of time crying after my matches, and there were so many times I questioned giving up, but then they would win and I would never get to see what I could do. And I really wanted to be the best. That was my goal, always to be the best. It wasn't about being the most famous, but it came with it. And you learn immediately how expensive it is to be on the tour. You're talking airfares, hotels, car rentals, and entry fees were $350 to $500 entry fees. And I was a kid. I never asked my mom for money or my dad for money to this day. Just my pride when I left home. I think I first left home when I was 12, and then pretty much permanently from the time I was 14 or 15. And then there were times that I came home through the passing of a grandparent or something like that. But I was very determined that I was going to make my mark on my own. And so uh, getting getting to number one, and when I won my first championship, I came out. Usually, all the women are still hanging around. They watched the finals, and then everybody would go eat in the hotel or convention center, wherever there is. And I remember that when I got done with all my interviews, there were no players around, which normally they would be around to go with the winner to go eat. So I go into the restaurant next door, and I had told myself, I'm going to win this championship, and if I do, it had an all-you-can-eat crab and lobster dinner. And I said, if I win this, I'm going to eat that. So afterwards, I was determined to go in there, and I sat, and as I came in, I'm looking for a table, I'm looking around. No one is looking up. Everyone is looking away. And I just stand there for a while looking to see if there's a face that might invite me to.
Wow.
So I got a table by myself amongst all of them, and I ate that crab and lobster dinner by myself. And then I went to my hotel room and cried all night. I just kept going over it in my mind. How hard is it going to be? How long is this going to last? So that was my first professional tournament win. And they didn't even have a trophy. It was just the beginning, a fledgling tour. They had originally been with the men, the WPBA and the MPBA, but then they split off because they had a new executive director that believed that the men should get 8 votes to the women's 2 votes. And the women were like, about our future? No, we should have just as many votes. And because that, the women went off on their own and started this new classic tour that started in 1993. And that was my rookie year. And so there was just a lot going on.
So if the women were petty and jealousy and left you alone, I would imagine that at some point, either a male pool player or somebody who was associated with the tour or just a fan took their shot, said, you know what, I'm going to ask out Jeanette Lee. I would imagine that happened more than once. Can you remember 1 or 2 examples where maybe that of a guy who shot their shot was kind of funny? And how did you end up ultimately figuring out a way to deflect those advances?
You know, a lot of people don't believe this, but well, early on the tour, I fell for a player, men's player called Bobby Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
And but I can say all the way until him and after him, and actually even after my divorce from my husband 9 years ago, we were married for 20 years. And all of that time, I never got asked out. And
What?
people always assumed that I had so many people asking me out. And I didn't know what was wrong with me that no one asked me out. But no one, and then actually until 9 years ago when we got divorced, from that point till last year, so 9 years of being divorced, I never got asked out by a single man. I ended up dating one man named Gene Allen, who was a friend of mine. And we had been friends for several years. And then at some point, I thought, okay, I'm ready to date. No one's asking me out. So I started downloading these dating apps. Because no one, I swear, not one person has asked me out. So I mentioned it to my friend, who then, I guess, knowing that I'm now looking to date, it was about 3 or 4 years after we got divorced, maybe 5. And he said, well, you know, I'm your man. And I'm like, no, I appreciate it. And I thought he was an incredible person, but I just was not feeling it with him. But he convinced me after a long period of time to give him a chance. And to be honest, with no one asking me out, it got lonely, you know? So I was like, okay. And so we dated for a few years, and then and then I broke it up with him for several reasons. And then I've gone another few years during my cancer bout. And just this last year, one man asked me out, but he was not someone I would date. So I said no to him, but that's it. In all these years, I had one guy ask me out.
I am
Isn't
assuming
that
then this,
crazy?
yes, and
I'm not that
I
bad.
didn't ask that question. I thought I was going to get funny stories and anecdotes of guys handing you notes during a pool play. That's what I
I'm
thought I
so
was going to
sorry.
get. Well, no, it's a good anecdote. It's the only thing I can think of is that you probably intimidated the hell out of everybody that
That's
you
what
would
they
have.
say.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was unintentional, but how much, I see your name, Black Widow. What a great name. What a phenomenal name. I mean,
Thank you.
it's great.
Yeah.
Were you ever not comfortable with that name because of the connotation and maybe the image that it projects, as successful and as lucrative as it might have been?
Absolutely. When I started playing, there was a place called Howard Beach Billiard Club in Howard Beach, New York. And the owner, he had just opened up the first $1 million club. And out of curiosity, I had gone in to check the place out.
Mhm.
And he remembered me. He said that he saw me walk in. I was so sweet. And then when I got a rack of balls, my everything changed. My demeanor, everything. I just started knocking balls in. And it reminded him of a black widow. And so he's the one that came up with that name. And he invited me to his grand opening because at that point he had just had a soft opening where he invited Willie Moscone. I got to play with them. He said,
Wow.
if you ever want to come back, free table time, free food, free everything, which meant a lot to me. I was spending a lot on table time. Not really, because I usually play for table time and win, because negotiating with men as a woman was quite easy, to be fair. And in any case, he invited me to that, and I started playing there a lot. And then at some point, I came in second in the New York State Championship. And I was already playing at Howard Beach Billiard Club, and I came in second. The woman who won was supposed to get a place in the WPBA National Championship. But a month before the tournament, they reached out to me and said, she still can't get her boss to let her off work. She can't go. So you get the slot. Would you like to go? And so I hung up with them, and I'm telling Gabe, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I want to go. This has been my dream to play on a women's pro event. And I had not qualified for it. I mean, I was winning all the local, regional women's tournaments, but they weren't all qualifiers for a real pro event. Certainly not the most prestigious event that they had, which is the WPBA National Championship. So he said, this is what I'll do. Well, right before that, let me say, I always complained, why aren't there more women playing? Bothered me. I said, I'll give free women's lessons on Monday or Tuesday night, one of your slow nights, if you'll give free pool time. And he said, you'll teach it. And I said, I'll teach it for free. I want to see more women playing pool. So I had come in a few days later, and on every table and everywhere, all over the place, was this. He had taken a photo from that grand opening with Willie Moscone.
Mhm.
He had taken it and put it on one of those trifolds. It's like a
Yeah.
regular sheet of paper. You fold it in three and you stand it up. And it said, come play pool with the Black Widow. She really knows how to break balls. And I had just come in, wasn't expecting, and I was like, oh my God, because I didn't want the Black Widow nickname. I was like horrified. I went to every table. I was like, my mom is going to see this. I'm like, no. And I'm taking them all. I said, Gabe, you can't do this. I said, I want to teach you. I said, you got to change it. He's like, it's too late. It's out there. You're just going to have to get used to it. I'm telling you, the Black Widow is your name, and everyone's going to know your name. You're going to be a world champion. I just know it. And trust me, they're going to remember the Black Widow. And I'm like, I don't want them to remember a Black Widow. I want them to know Jeanette Lee. So he wouldn't get rid of it. It was everywhere. So fast forward to this opportunity. I'm telling him, I'm like, wow, I got this opportunity. He said, that's great. And I said, problem is I can't afford to go. I said, I don't have, all my money would go to pool. Every time I won a tournament, it would be money to play more pool, to play more tournaments. But I never had a lot. I was always struggling. I was supporting myself. And so, and think about supporting yourself when you're 16 and 18 and you have your own apartment in Manhattan and you're covering those and you're covering playing pool and table time. And I was able to manage just hustling and playing pool, but I never had a lot. And to come up with the amount of money it would take, I didn't have to do the entry fee. you got that by winning the state championship. So they gave me that. But I said, I don't have clothes. I don't have dressy clothes. I have T-shirts and jeans. I don't have, airfare and eat. And I don't know how I'm going to get there. I certainly wasn't old enough for a rental car yet. And so I'm trying to figure this all out. And he said, I'll cover all of it. And I'm like, what? He said, I'll cover all of it and I'll give you $500 towards an entirely new wardrobe. My eyes just, and I'm like, why? On what condition? He said on one condition. I'm like, he said, you have to wear all black. And I'm like, well, that's easy, because I was already wearing all black. That was a New York thing and a mom delinquent thing, rebellious thing. I had started when I was 12 or 13. I was wearing a lot of black. But it's also common in New York to wear a lot of black.
Right. Yep.
And so I didn't have a problem with it, but I said, why? Why is that your condition? And I mean, I'll do it, but why? And he said, because I'm telling you, you're the Black Widow. You're going to be a world champion, and everyone is going to know your name. And you're just going to have to trust me. And I was just like, hey, I'm getting, a couple $1,000s of expenses plus a full wardrobe. So I went along with it. But when I went to the tournament, I had no intention of mentioning the Black Widow. None. Coincidentally, that one tournament, I really think this has a lot to do with the growth of the Black Widow. It just so happened that Alessandra Stanley from the New York Times Magazine had been working for several months on a big expose of professional pool and the hustlers within. And it was like a 12-page spread in the New York Times Magazine. And they had Ava Lawrence, who was the #1 player at the time, on the cover. And boom, it did everything. Boom, she was on David Letterman and the Good Morning Show and all kinds of things. And it was great for the women's tour right while we were, actually that was in 91 that came out. So I had not played on the Pro Tour yet, but I had qualified to play in some other tournament where she was at. In any case, they had asked, by the way, this was the last pro event that she was going before she was going to release this story. And she said, while I'm here, she was doing all the interviews, following Ava around, and she said, is there anyone here from New York? Since it was a New York Times Magazine. And they said, well, we don't have any pros, but there's a rookie right there, Jeanette Lee. This is her first event, and she's from New York. So only for that reason, they included me in this 12-page spread on New York Times Magazine.
Wow. And
she put me as, dressed in all black. They put a really dark lighting on me. I didn't get to see the photos until they came out, but it was this very dark, it was disappointing. I was so proud to tell my mom that I was going to be in New York Times Magazine. But the way that Alessandra Stanley put me, she said, oh, this Jeanette Lee, a.k.a. the Black Widow, in her bad Bond girl leather and lace, which at that point, I didn't even own any leather or lace. I've never liked lace, and I definitely couldn't afford any leather. But that's the way she put me in this very dark, only to be trounced by, and with all her whatever, she was only to be trounced by Joanne Mason Parker 9-2. When in actuality, I played Joanne Mason Parker, who was also originally from upstate New York, and she had me down 9-2. And I came back and beat her 9-8, where at 8-8, she broke and ran the whole table. I didn't get a chance. So I was very proud to have gone 9-8 with the #2 ranked woman in the world. But in the article, she must have left before the end of it.
Oh.
Because she wrote that I got trounced 9-2, the #2 rank, so all my things really had no, nothing
weight
behind it. And it was just it was terrible. My first few years, I'm so glad I didn't quit, because I really wanted to so often.
So as you were playing and developing, and more people, and certainly as media exposure changed and morphed, I think at some point you probably were aware that your popularity wasn't just necessarily because you were a great pool player, because you were this beautiful woman. So now you have to sort of enter the world of almost, You almost see it now with these influencers, these athletes who use their appearance along with their athletic skill to establish a brand. And you would have been, on the ground floor of that long before social media, but you had to at least kind of enter that world unknowingly. What was your relationship like with being known as, oh, that's the beautiful pool player, as opposed to, she's a phenomenal pool player?
Right, right. So if you were to look really early, if people were to actually show ESPN film from way early, in those first 2-3 years, I didn't even really know how to put makeup on yet. I wasn't this polished.
Yeah.
Who they ended up seeing as my name grew and as I got on more televised matches and things like that, where I made money to buy clothes, but until then, I really didn't. You'd be surprised how I wasn't as put together. It was something that I grew into. You learn very quickly how expensive it is. So a friend that I met at that first event, John Lewis, I was telling him, I said, I would love to play in more, but I just don't see myself. I mean, Gabe didn't tell me he'd sponsor me in all the tournaments. He'd sponsor me in that one. And I told him, I said, I'd love to keep competing, but I'm just not sure, if I'll be able to afford it. And so I learned I need sponsors. And he recommended I go to the BCA trade show, the Billiards Congress of America trade show, which is where all the top manufacturers gather and things like that. And he said, go there, be ready, have some kind of resume, and see if you can get some sponsors. And that's what I did. I saved up for about 6 months.
Wow.
To make it to St. Louis. I put on my prettiest clothes that I had, which were not all black. And I just went in my little heels from booth to booth to booth. And years later, what they told me is, you stood out because the first thing you said was, this is what I think I can do for you. Whereas almost every pool player would come at as, I need money, I need this, can you help me? I'm a great pool player. And that's all they would offer, is saying, I'm a great player. And I was saying, I can go to other trade shows, I can go to your local distributors, and I can talk to them about your product. I can sell, I can do whatever it is, but I'm willing to work hard. And and the fact that I would even bring a resume, I opened the yellow pages and I paid $30. You wouldn't believe how hard it was to find a resume writer, because you'd have to look under all these different things. But I was able to find, and he charged me $30 to write my resume, and I brought all the clippings of having become known in New York. So I was on the New York Post, Daily News. I was in the different, for whatever reason, over the last several years, I had built up a bit of name in the New York tri-state area, playing in all these different events.
So
and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine. But it wasn't immediately the Black Widow owned being the Black Widow. It was definitely something that, as I played in more tournaments and developed more of a fan base where I felt supported, because I really didn't for the first 2 years. I really felt like the best thing for everyone would be for me to go away. But I just didn't want to go away. They made it clear. It was very clear everywhere I went that I was not wanted. But as my name grew and I started winning all these tournaments, because in the first year I hadn't won any, I just kept coming in 17th and 9th through 12th and 5th, 6th and 3rd and 2nd and 3rd. It was January of 1994 that I won my first event. Then I won the second event. Then I won the 5th event. Then I, had all these other finishes that made me number one. I became number one less than 6 months later. And that started getting a lot of attention, and that took time, but I started building up a fan base. But during that time, I'm buying a little nicer clothes, but I'm still trying to compete in all these things. But I learned the value of having sponsors, and that building a brand, building an image, building something repetitively and recognizable was going to give me better chances at sponsors. The more sponsors I had, the less I had to work. because during that whole time I was still working. I was working at an R&B rhythm and blues club. I was working at a Korean computer company. I was like 19, I think, at that point, or 20. And, just trying to play pool. I tried being a nanny because I could work from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then play pool all night. But that didn't work out well because I was so exhausted from taking care of this little 5-year-old or 7-year-old. I mean, I was just wiped out, and I would take a taxi to get to the place so I could have as much pool time as possible and rush back. But I tried every kind of job so that I could keep playing more pool, and I learned that with sponsors, you won't have to work all these other jobs. You could just show up 2 or 3 times a year at a trade show or, some place that they would like to have me go. But I was fortunate to pick up Imperial International, who really, they had me do 1, maybe 2 trade shows a year, but the rest of the time they said, you do you. Wow. And they gave me, I think, over $30,000 in a $30,000 contract. I wasn't even a pro yet. When, I had just started. I had just played in my first pro event. So he said, I just believe in you and I just want to support you. He didn't even haggle with me on what I wanted. I asked very high, assuming that he was going to give me much less. And he was just like, okay. And they gave me medical, dental, everything.
Wow.
Yeah, they even put me on as an employee so that I could have, because I had a very bad medical history since I was very young. And
I was going to ask you that.
Noticeable because I was always hurting. And he just didn't want me to worry about any of that. So I was very lucky. I picked up a few other sponsors. I probably picked up about $35,000, $37,000 worth of sponsorship in that one trip. And from what I understand, there's no one that's done that to this day, not even half that. And I didn't have a lot of fancy clothes, and I wasn't polished. Wasn't comfortable in front of the camera, hadn't done a lot of interviews yet, but I was determined, and I think people felt that.
Though you mentioned your medical condition, and I asked you 1 or 2 questions, and I'll wrap this up. You played and have lived with scoliosis. I cannot imagine what it's like to live with it, much less try to play pool with it.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that kind of condition to be a successful pool player? Because I would imagine that would have been very painful at times.
Yes. So my scoliosis was an S curve, meaning there were 2 major curves. It was 58 and 56 degrees, so fairly extreme. And as a young child, I was very physically active, very competitive, loved to play against the boys and run and play all these different ball games and running games as a child. And then to play pool, I thought, oh, this is not physically, active. I can do this. But after bending and bending and bending, my back was always hurting. So that's when I started thinking of rebuilding my body. And I went from just this girl that played pool to a person that really took getting fit, being strong, strengthening my core and things like that was very important. I was still completely obsessed. So I would play to the point of absolute collapse. And then I would have friends that would have to basically practically carry me home or go with me in a taxi home, which was about 5 blocks away. I was living at 23rd and Lex in a little studio apartment by myself. Because what I could afford, it was $500 a month. It was just this really little bitty. It was like a tiny room, a bathroom, and a sink. That's what I had.
There was no kitchen?
No, there was a sink and a bathroom. But it was $500 a month. And I was able to get like one of those tiny little fridges, that you might put in the dorm.
Right.
So that's how I lived, but I didn't care because all I wanted to do was play pool anyway. So I would go to work and play pool, go to work and play pool, because I worked at a Korean computer company that was at 28th and Lex, and I worked at the Rhythm and Blues Club called Tramps, which was across the street from Chelsea Billiards and coincidentally owned by the same owner, Conlith, who was from England, which is why the snooker tables were in there. In any case, I forgot what I was trying to get at, but
about living and playing with scoliosis, just how you did it. I don't know how you did it.
I I beat my body up, and I learned that whenever I would have to lay down in bed, I would start imagining myself playing pool, breaking, balls spreading, and I would practice running out. And at first, I would miss all the time. And you would think if you're imagining it, you could control making every ball, but it's not so. When you're imagining it, you still miss. And over months and months, I got better at running more balls before I would miss, to the point where at first I made more balls than I did in real life, but eventually, I mean, opposite. I would miss more balls than I would make in real life, but eventually I could run more and more balls, and I think that that developed my focus, your stamina of focus, how long before you just kind of fall apart and have to regroup. Really felt like that helped me. Then I started, because of my back, I started thinking much more about your peak performance mentally, started reading a lot of books, watching a lot of videos. It was very hard to get me away from the pool table. But most of the time in the early, well, actually throughout my whole career, most of the time it wasn't up to me. My body would just collapse. And so I just started purchasing and investing in AccuStats videotapes. There was a man named Pat Fleming that would go to all the women's and pro men's matches and record it, and he would sell VHS tapes. And so I would order all those. So anytime I was forced to lay down because my body just wouldn't do it anymore, I would watch tape after tape, and I would think, what am I going to do at this situation? What did they do? Why did they do it? I didn't just watch. I learned that there's people that would just watch their videos, but I never just watched. I would think, what would I do here? Oh, they did something different. Why? I would just study and study and study. So there was never a minute that I wasn't either playing pool or studying pool. And I really felt like that helped me through a lot of the tough times that I would have otherwise had AccuStats not been available. You can only imagine it in your mind for so long before you're worn out and you want to do something else. But me watching those videos, I could watch them forever. I was so fascinated. And it really took a lot of the misery away from being bedridden, which happened a lot because I would not play and stop in a healthy point. I would play until I'd collapse. So it was very often I would play 30 to 35 hours. The longest someone remembered was 37 hours, but I would just play myself.
37 hours?
Yeah. Until I would literally be on the table and I just would stop and I just could not stand back up, or I could not walk again, and then somebody would help me. But I was very obsessed. This is not something I would recommend to people. Do it smart. I think I did, considering my circumstance, but I was so obsessed with playing that, I didn't take good care of myself at all.
So now you're 51.
Yes.
So I read.
52.
Well, let's go with 49. You look you look 29.
Yes.
You have led a life that I don't think even fiction writers can come up with. There's some details to this I'm just absolutely in awe of and amazed by.
Thank you.
You're a mom, and you overcame and dealt with, I would imagine, a very challenging relationship with your parents when you were a kid. And
Yes.
now the fact that you achieved what you have achieved and done all this stuff and did it on your own, how was your relationship? And I don't know the status of this, so if I hope for with us, how was your relationship with your parents? How did that evolve, and how is it now?
I'm actually in my mom's bedroom now.
So great. Okay.
Yes, and it's a very good, close, loving relationship with my parents. I mean, as soon as I started winning championships and trophies, I also tried to give them money for raising me. And but they were very proud. They became very proud because she just thought my daughter is out till 4 or 5 in the morning, doing whatever. That's not a career. I didn't even know it was going to be a career. I just knew that I had to do it to stay alive. It was my oxygen. It was what I needed. It wasn't for me, it wasn't a choice. And that's something that she came to understand. But as she saw my success, they became very supportive. I don't blame them at all for not supporting their teenage daughter from playing pool all hours of the night, end on it. And this is not generally, it's not a very profitable, lucrative career. For me, it became because my name kind of went beyond just pool, and it grew, but none of us could have known that. And I love my parents to death. I'm very thankful for them. I'm very thankful to them. And actually, my health declined over COVID, and then right in the middle of COVID, getting cancer. And if you watch the movie Jeanette Lee Versus that ESPN made a 30 for 30 just in, I think, in 2022, so not that long ago. If you have ESPN Plus, you can still watch it. And there's an interview with her where she said, I always thought I would die before her, but now it seems like we're in a race. And then she just kind of stopped and looked down, and it just made me bawl, that she is worried, and this was before I had become cancer free. I mean, I finished all of the chemo. I thought for sure they would say, yep, you're good to go. But instead they said, you finished your treatments, but you're going to stay on this maintenance treatment, Lynparza. And I said, okay, but I did all the chemo, so why am I not in remission? And they said, I'm sorry, but I don't think you're ever going to go into remission. And I went, what do you mean never? And they said, well, you've got some lymph nodes that we can't surgically. They tried to get out during my total hysterectomy that they did. They tried to remove, and they removed several lymph nodes, but there were several that they couldn't safely reach. And so they just said, they're not going to go anywhere. They haven't gone anywhere through all this chemo, so they're not going to expect it's going to on its own. And that was devastating, because I thought, I was very positive and willful, and chemo was not easy, but I was bound and determined I was not going to leave. I have 6 children. I don't know if everyone knows that, but I have 5 daughters and a son. They come every which way possible, from adoption, from stepchildren. There was a foster, he was 14, John. And I had one through a surrogate, because we didn't think I could successfully have one, and then boom, when I was 40, I got pregnant, so that was my last one. And I had a lot to lose, the way that I felt. So I was very, very determined, and I think that positivity, and I'm also a Christian, but I had no idea how much positive prayer and messages would come from around the world, huge groups praying for me. And it was that November that I had visited New York, and there was a prayer group, and one was known to be a healer, a Christian healer. And he takes no credit for it. He doesn't even know how it happened, but he's able to pray and heal people. Anyway, my very next one, my doctors saw me and they said, I don't know what happened, but you're in remission. They're gone.
No way.
And I was like, what do you mean they're gone? They're like, you don't have anything, nothing. You have no lymph nodes. You have no cancer cells. It just vanished. And so I'm going to give credit to the prayer. I can't think of what else I did differently that could have suddenly caused all of my, everything to go away. But I believe in the power of prayer, and so I'm going to give credit to that. But it's been a rough road, and my mom's been there through everything, and I'm just thankful that she's healthy. My mom's 84, my dad's 94, but my mom was a registered nurse for 48 years. And so she has a lot of experience in the medical world and is able to keep her and them healthy and without diabetes, without all these things. And so I'm very thankful.
I had expectations. I had a certain degree of expectations for this interview, and it way overshot it. I have wanted to do this for so long, and it's such an inspiring story. I mean, all of it. Just it's incredible what you've done.
There are several stories, quite a few stories that I've never talked about that are in the book, in my
Yeah, and
memoir.
I hope people read it.
I'm sorry, my memoir called The Black Widow.
I hope people read it because I think there's some details in there that people should know. That it's just not necessarily to admire what you've done, but to know what can be possible through
Yes.
knocking on doors and determination and just showing up and not quitting. I'm amazed by it. I really want to thank you for your time. You were very gracious with your time.
Thank
I'm
you.
so happy for your health and this book, and I hope you keep playing for as long as you want. Thank you so very
Thank
much,
you.
Jeanette. Thank you.